Budget review. The state taking a moment to review the current budget ahead of the start of the fiscal year 2024. We'll hear from an expert on the state's financial outlook and how it might impact you. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. The state has reached the midpoint of the fiscal year 2023, and we're getting a better understanding now of what the state budget is going to look like for next year. Now, this outlook coming from the state's Quick Start report from earlier this month. The state will face a budget deficit starting the year at over $4 billion. Report laying out the goal of maintaining high funding for education, health care, infrastructure, and mental health services while not increasing taxes. Budget Division estimates of a $231 billion budget next year, with the deficit expected to swell to $9.5 billion. The governor will announce the executive budget for 2024 in January of next year, 2 months from right now. To give us additional insight on the state budget highlights from this year and what next year might look like, when we're joined now by Patrick Orecki, director of the State Studies for the Citizens Budget Commission. Patrick, thanks for coming on. For those who've never heard of the Citizens Budget Commission, what exactly is that?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan government watchdog. We focus on New York State and New York City's budgets especially, trying to find areas where the state and city can deliver services better and more efficiently.
And you guys issue reports, you study it and say, look, at guys, you don't have to do what we say, but here's what we're seeing, here's what we're thinking.
Yeah, we try to kind of be, in many ways, a translator for the public, where we're experts in looking at the state budget, and we can go through the laborious documents and kind of distill it down into simple facts for people.
Now, the Thanksgiving, November, this time of year is, the year's almost over for most of us in our minds, but for budget-wise, we're only about halfway through, right, the fiscal year?
Yeah, we're in the third quarter of the state's fiscal year now, which runs from April to March. So kind of a quiet period where last year's budget is behind us, kind of the negotiations are well behind us, and we're still several weeks away from the governor proposing a new budget, but there is still a lot going on this time of year. When
they project a budget, when they pass one, like say they do it on April 1st, do they know for sure how much money is going to come in, or is it kind of a guesstimate and then you see where it lands? And like, is this the time of year where you figure out if the numbers are stacking up?
Yeah, this is a hugely important point in the year where you have at least half of the year's worth of data to understand where you are. Going back to the beginning of the year, it's a very sophisticated guesstimate. So there are teams of people at the state who are monitoring tax returns, especially to see what things are looking like going forward, making projections of the economy and how that impacts its taxes over the next year and years after that too.
Your commission issued kind of a report card or a projection, and it had 6 takeaways. If we could walk through some of those, because my untrained eye, I think I understand, but I'd rather talk to you as an expert. The first one was conservative receipts coming in, reduced gap. Explain what you were talking about there.
Yeah, so conservative receipts projections is what I was just describing, where at the beginning of the year, when the state has enacted a budget for the coming year, they make estimates of what is going to come in to pay for all the services the state delivers. And generally they hedge conservative, which is how you should do budgeting. You shouldn't expect rosy projections that aren't going to come to pass and you have a crisis mid-year. So what we're seeing is that the state is kind of maintaining a very conservative outlook of the rest of the year, which means that things could get better over the course of the rest of the year.
The second of the 6 said that in dovetailing from that, huge budget gaps, do they exist now, or they might be coming, where we're going to have not enough money in terms of the budget?
Yeah, there are still significant gaps in the state's budget to close over not only next year, but the years after that. The good news is that over the last month, with updates to projections and what the state is actually spending and taking in, those gaps did get smaller. But we're still looking at, for the fiscal year that starts April 1st of 24, a budget gap of about $4.3 billion to close.
And does that come from everywhere, from like retail sales, maybe not as strong, those taxes, income taxes in terms of people getting certain bonuses and you get money from does it come from a lot of places when you get those gaps?
Yeah, the state's main sources are the personal income tax, sales and use taxes, and some other miscellaneous receipts. The one that really changes and fluctuates mid-year is personal income taxes. So the state has very high rates on top earners especially. Their incomes can be very volatile because of capital gains, because of Wall Street performance. So that's where you get a lot of the movement during the year.
Yeah, I remember years ago, not to go off topic, but when they were, after the recession almost crashed the entire economy with the housing crisis, they were like, we got to get rid of all these Wall Street bonuses and these hedge fund bonuses. And I know some people at the Capitol kind of took a breath and said, well, hold up there, because somebody gets a $10 million bonus, the state's going to get, a good chunk of that money, and they rely on that money, don't they?
Sure, yeah, Wall Street really is not only kind of directly through the people who work on Wall Street who get those bonuses and high salaries, but everyone who invests and has capital gains income. What happens on Wall Street impacts the state budget significantly.
I'll try to walk through the rest of these. Number 3 was non-recurring resources drying up a little bit. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, one of the things that we're concerned with is you have those gaps on paper. I said $4.3 billion for next year, a little bit bigger in the out years beyond that. One of our concerns is that those gaps would even be larger if the state weren't still kind of enjoying some of the benefits of the last few years' glut of cash.
Sure,
so,
all that COVID money, federal money flying in here to help us get on our feet again.
Exactly, that's a big chunk of it. Tax receipts did go dramatically up during COVID too because of Wall Street performing very well and capital gains being very strong. So as we see those kind of come back down to normal and federal aid go away, the gaps we fear are even larger several years into the future.
Your fourth one, we talked about the economy maybe being a little sluggish. That does fuel a lot of this, doesn't it? Because that's the water that goes everywhere on the sidewalk. If the economy is not doing well, none of this does well, right?
Yeah, the good news is there's still growth. Back in January, the state experts started to expect that there would be a short and mild recession sometime during this year. A lot of people did. That hasn't come to pass, and right now it looks like it's time to reverse that expectation of a recession, which is good news.
Only one part of your report made me say, wow, and kind of look back, step back. Number 5 said spending grew by 19% the last 2 years, and like the previous 10 years was maybe that number a little bit less. Should that scare us, or is that attributed to coming off of COVID and they had to overspend a little bit to get this state back on its feet?
Yeah, a big part of it is what happened in COVID. So you had huge amounts of federal aid delivered. The state raised taxes during COVID. So you had $19 billion of spending growth over just a couple of years, which, as you said, was the same amount that we grew the budget over the prior decade. So it was a huge amount of spending growth in a very short period.
Last one, number 6, was state reserves appear to be inadequate. Is that literally what it sounds like? Is there money that's sort of squirreled away for a rainy day that we need to pull from sometimes?
Yeah, and this is an area where we're quite positive about what the state has done. Coming into COVID, only had a couple $1 billion saved in a $200 billion budget. That's almost nothing. To the governor's credit especially, really put an emphasis on saving some money while we had cash, putting it away into a lockbox, and grew those reserves from $2 billion to about $20 billion today. Good, but we think there's more to do.
Last question, I'll give you 20 seconds, which is totally unfair. We seem to have one party kind of running the state. Do things work better, worse, or doesn't it matter? I always believed, a check and balance can kind of be good for budgets, but is the state kind of chugging along even though Democrats are running pretty much everything?
I think to a degree it might make budget negotiations a bit easier, but those are our elected representatives. They're representing the people of New York and have varying priorities, and what they come out to is hopefully a good result for everybody. All
right. Well, Patrick Orecki from the Citizens Budget Commission. I feel better that you're watching this stuff right now because it's a little over my head, but you guys are clearly keeping an eye on it. And let's have you back again maybe early next year at the latest to talk about where things land as we come towards the end of the fiscal year.
Anytime. Thanks
Patrick,
for having me.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
Well, as the state gets set to lay out the budget for next year, we're also keeping an eye on a number of legislative priorities from the state capitol. When we come back, we'll break down some of the most significant prices of the legislation from this year, and we'll have some analysis on where the issues may go when that session does begin in January. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. As the year nears its end now, we're looking ahead to the legislative session in January. Now, some of the biggest things to impact the state this past year may we see continuing impact in 2024. In the state's ongoing immigration situation, more than 125,000 asylum seekers from the southern border have been bused to New York City and regions upstate. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has discussed cutting funding for some city services to try to offset the huge budget impact. The state's legal recreation cannabis market has also seen some growth with additional licenses being given out to new prospective businesses. However, that industry has seen significant pauses due to lawsuits from some who say the system did not treat them equally. To bring us analysis now, one of the biggest items of the legislature from the last year and what might be focusing on coming into the new year, Blair Horner, the executive director for the New York Public Interest Research Group. We like to call them NYPIRG. Blair, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What were the big ones this year that they didn't get done or that they half got done that they might want to tackle them? We're not going to have a special session. That's clear. That's not happening.
Right. I mean, in a sense, last session sets up this session in the sense that the budget that they concluded in April, at the end of April,
right,
was sort of anticipating that there would be a deficit. It sort of got bigger than they expected, then it shrunk back down again.
Yeah.
But I think it really, the shadow that's going to be cast over the session of 2024 is sort of the budget items, and that's sort of tied to what happened in 2023. So that's, when you look at a session where there's going to be an election, where they're going to want to get out of town early because they have primaries in June.
Sure.
Lawmakers are going to really be focused on getting the budget done, and I think that's going to be the big item.
Yeah, you're going to make me jump to my last question, but I'll throw it in now because you brought up the election. Does that affect, I mean, it obviously affects, say, they want to get out of Dodge quick and campaign and keep their jobs, obviously. Do things, because New York's so blue, does a presidential election not impact us? Because I know other places, you know, things might come to a standstill during a presidential election year where nobody wants to help the other party. Nobody wants to get along. It's all Hatfields and McCoys, you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I think, you know, when you look at the election of 2024, the path to control of the House of Representatives may run from Nassau County up the Hudson Valley to Syracuse. That's how close it is. Right now, the Republicans have a 5-seat majority. They have 5 seats in New York that they won by whiskers. And so I think the election is going to matter in New York in a way that's not presidential per se, but certainly with regard to who controls the House and maybe the Congress.
There's no rules that keep outside money from these various PACs from coming into those races, right? Because I think we saw with Delgado and some others in the past where a lot of money seemed to be coming in from the outside where they see a vulnerable seat to the opposite party. They just dump tons of money. You're getting money from Colorado coming in here because it's all part of the same pie.
Well, I think, you know, what I just described about the path to control of like who's going to be the Speaker of the House runs through New York. I think everybody knows that. And so, yeah, I think the rule will be, in fact, not that money can't come in, but that money will come in like a fire hose.
Right, right. We had earlier in this particular show that you're on this morning, we had a guest on talking about, you know, a $4 billion gap in the budget, which was manageable, was his word. I mean, they weren't pulling the fire alarm or anything like that. But money is a little tight. He was pointing out that some of the COVID money that was pumping things up is all sort of going away now, and they have to pay for things with the money that they've got, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And the projected $4.3 billion deficit for the upcoming fiscal year, which starts on April 1st, goes through March 31st of 2025, is relatively manageable in a $230 billion plus budget. It's relatively small potatoes, lunch money. But the rest of us, mere mortals, it's a lot. And so it's going to, when I talk to lawmakers and stuff now, they're all talking about how they're going to have to dig in and basically freeze spending. And so that's okay. But what happens in the localities? New York City's facing massive deficit, and they are having serious financial problems. The mayor's cutting programs, it looks like proposed up to 15%. All localities are suffering. So what is the state going to do to bail out those localities? Adds to the budget pressure, I think, for this year. So it's going to be more complicated than just a straight up, what is the state's budget deficit?
Is the New York City issue almost all the migrant issue with all those people coming in and they need to be taken care of, or is it more than that? There's other issues that are at play?
It's more than that. I mean, they budgeted for, anticipating a budget deficit for the upcoming fiscal year, the migrant issue about dealing with people that are seeking asylum in the United States and in New York just exacerbates the problem. And so the mayor is trying to use basically the narrative of the asylum seekers to tie into dealing with the budget deficit overall. So it's both structural and exacerbated.
We've seen this tug of war on crime in the last couple of weeks where the state's putting out numbers saying, no, we're doing okay with most of crime if you take New York City out of the mix, you know. That's like saying take the turkey out of the Thanksgiving dinner, but we'll put that aside. But, you know, polling with the Siena poll and the New York Times poll, people are worried about crime. They feel it's getting worse. Are there any crime-related bills or issues you think they might be tackling, or did they kind of deal with all that with the bail reform stuff?
I think they feel like that they are on defense, the Democratic lawmakers, because they passed these bills, and Republicans are going to use it as a cudgel against them, like they did in 2022. I mean, one of the reasons why the House is controlled by Republicans is because of crime-related issues in New York. Even though the House had nothing to do with the bills, Republicans did a good job of hanging the issue around the necks of Democrats. So I think they'll be playing defense. Where you're going to see that stuff play out, again, I think is going to be in the context of the budget. For example, the governor said earlier this week that she's going to look to see if the state can actually bail out the shortfall for the New York City Police Department. And so there's ways where the state can sort of step in and help, and at the same time make it look like, and hopefully it will, do something about public safety.
If Kathy Hochul and Democrats who control things, if they want to freeze spending, where does that sit with some of the unions and various things? Are they going to want their raises? Are they going to say, well, where's our bump here, and how do they deal with that?
Well, that's the multi-dimensional chess game known as the budget, right?
Yeah.
There's all these competing pressures about people wanting to spend more, and that's what New York State does. I mean, the budget deficits are sort of anticipating that growth in spending will go up at the inflation rate, and therefore you have a shortfall. So how the state deals with that, do they kick the can? The state does have significant reserves, rainy day fund reserves, upwards to $20 billion that they can draw down from. It's an election year. Nobody's going to want to do unpopular cuts, and nobody's going to want to do anything that gets the unions to go, DEFCON 5 or something about it. So I think they're going to try to muddle through, but I think the sort of exacerbating issues of the asylum seekers, coupled with the local budgets that are under a lot of stress, I think that's going to make it more complicated for them.
Okay, this will be lightning round. A couple quick ones I wanted to ask you about. It seems like it's taking forever to get the recreational marijuana up on its feet. Do they finally get the licenses out they need to and get these stores open? Because I know they're relying on the money.
Yeah, they have to, because they're relying on the money. And I think New Yorkers expect it. I guess New Yorkers are getting tired to drive to Massachusetts.
Right.
Lightning round.
Aid and dying bill, they always seem to almost get to the finish line but don't get there. Is that still trying to find enough support?
Yeah, I think on that issue, I think the changes in the demographics of where the boomers are getting older and older and older, I think that works ultimately in passage of the legislation, because Vermont has a law.
Yeah.
But it's hard because there's a lot of religious issues and sort of ideological issues that are not easily bridged. It's not like money in the budget. It's about how people believe what should be happening in their lives. So that's a much harder issue to pass.
Last loaded question with 10 seconds is from your perspective, your job, is Kathy Hochul easier to deal with and transparency-wise than her predecessor, or is it?
In terms of transparency, I mean, they're nicer.
Yeah.
So there is that. That always makes things easier. I mean, we have our policy differences with her, just like we did with the previous governor and all of her predecessors. I mean, that's the way it works. But it is, they tend to be less cantankerous when you get them on the phone.
Yes, gotcha. Blair, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you again soon. Limo Safety Task Force will not be reconvened. Coming up, we'll explain why and how safety advocates are responding to that. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. Governor Kathy Hochul has vetoed a bill to extend the Limousine Passenger Safety Task Force. This task force was created following the crash on Long Island in 2015 and, of course, the Schoharie limo crash that killed 20 people back in 2018. Our Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine telling us what the governor wants to do instead.
The governor vetoed more than 30 bills that would have created or extended various commissions and task forces because they cost the state too much money. The Limo Safety Task Force, which was made up of state agency leaders, business owners, and family members who lost loved ones, provided recommendations to the state as to how to make limos safer. However, the bills that would have made their recommendations law didn't pass both houses. Now, the governor is endorsing those bills as a part of the Stretch Limousine Passenger Safety Act, which includes requiring a minimum $10,000 fine for operating a suspended limo and seizure of license plates, requiring limos to be equipped with enhanced safety features, and prohibiting the operation of a limousine that is over 10 years old or has mileage exceeding 350,000 miles, whichever comes first.
Hopefully, we're going to be able to put together another set of bills that will deal with the issues that the original task force brought forward.
Assembly Transportation Chair Bill Magnarelli says he'd like to sponsor the governor's program bill. I asked David Brown, owner of Premier Transportation and Limo Task Force member, to share his thoughts about it.
What the governor put forward, we agree with. There's some things, though, that we'd like to be held to an equal standard as the bus industry.
Senator Jim Tedisco is disappointed about the veto, saying the task force should have had a chance to further look into the Inspector General's report. He'd like a legislative hearing to be held.
Bring the IG in and ask the questions we would have had our task force members ask so we can get to the bottom of this.
The governor is calling for the laws to be passed. Whether it happens in the state budget or separately remains to be seen. Reporting in Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
Stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, as we near the winter months, health news will likely be on the minds of many concerned with the spread of diseases like the cold, the flu, COVID. According to the CDC, from October through last week, there were at least 700,000 cases of the flu reported, with nearly 500 flu-related deaths. Also, emergency rooms are still bracing for the possibility of overwhelming cases of RSV, flu, and COVID. While New York isn't seeing the major hospitalizations just yet, thankfully, that could change after Thanksgiving gatherings, where we jam large crowds together in one room. Next week, we'll look to speak to a health expert on the steps you can take to keep your family safe all winter long. For now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm John Gray in Albany. We'll see you right here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York. Here's a full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across the great state of New York.